My brother laughed and said, "You're still living paycheck to paycheck?" I just smiled and said, "Cool, then move out of my paid-off condo." And that night he called 14 times. It was a Thursday evening, quiet, cool, nothing special. I just pulled dinner out of the oven, baked salmon, jasmine rice, and sautéed spinach. Something simple, something clean. My brother, Neil, was already seated at the dining table like he owned the place, scrolling through his phone with that same smirk he'd worn since we were kids. That smirk that said, "I'm better, and I know it." He barely looked up when I set the plate in front of him. "Man," he said, picking up his fork, "you're still living paycheck to paycheck?" He didn't even say it with malice. Just casual cruelty, the way people comment on the weather. And to him, maybe it was just weather. Cloudy skies for me, eternal sunshine for him. I didn't answer right away. I just sat across from him, took a bite, chewed slowly. Let the silence do some of the heavy lifting. See, Neil had been crashing at my condo for almost 3 months now. Rent-free. No utilities, no groceries, nothing. After getting laid off from some flashy fintech startup, he burned through his savings faster than you can say. Liquidity. Then got evicted from his downtown apartment. And like the idiot little brother I've always been, I told him he could stay with me. Just until you get back on your feet. He was once the golden boy of our family. Big income, designer suits, posting photos from rooftop bars and all-inclusive resorts. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, worked a quiet accounting job, budgeted like my life depended on it. Neil had always made it a point to remind me I was average. That night was no different. "You know," he added between mouthfuls, "you should think about investing in crypto or something. You could double your income. Gotta think bigger." I set my fork down, looked him straight in the eye. And I smiled, not a forced smile, not bitter. Just calm. Still. "Cool," I said. "Then move out of my paid-off condo." The silence that followed was beautiful. He blinked, like his brain didn't compute the math. Paid off? That wasn't a word in his vocabulary. He let out a laugh, dry, sharp. Like he thought I was bluffing. "Wait. You serious?" he asked. I didn't say anything. I just kept eating. Smiling. That night, he called me 14 times. I didn't answer once. The calls started around midnight. At first, I thought it was an emergency. Maybe he'd locked himself out. Maybe something had happened to his car. Something reasonable. But when I picked up my phone and saw the call log, 4 missed calls, all from Neil, I knew exactly what it was. I didn't answer the 5th. Instead, I got up, walked to the front door, and turned the deadbolt one last time. The locks had already been changed earlier that afternoon. Quietly. Efficiently. I'd even taken the day off work to make sure it got done before dinner. The thing was, I hadn't planned on doing it. Not until that dinner conversation. Not until he said it again. Paycheck to paycheck. That phrase had haunted me for years. Neil used it the way other people used your first name, just part of his default language when speaking to me. He said it when I bought a used car instead of leasing a luxury one. He said it when I passed on a Vegas bachelor party because I didn't want to dip into savings. He said it when I skipped upgrading to the newest phone because mine still worked just fine. What he never knew, what he never bothered to ask, was what I was really doing all those years. I was paying down the mortgage. Every spare dollar, every overtime hour, every tax return and bonus. I didn't care about vacations or gadgets or expensive brunches. I wanted peace, stability, freedom. And a week ago, I made the last payment. My condo, modest, quiet, nothing flashy, was finally mine. Paid off in full. No more monthly bleeding. No more watching the bank eat half my paycheck. And here Neil was, sitting under my roof, drinking my filtered water, wearing my slippers, and mocking me for not living large like him. So yeah, I changed the locks. I bagged his stuff neatly, folded clothes, electronics, even that ridiculous LED toothbrush he swore was life-changing, and set it all gently in the hallway outside my door. I even included a small envelope with 2 things inside, a $20 bill and a note. It said, "Being broke is tough. You'll figure it out, right?" That was it. And just like that, the first crack in his ego started to show. By 2 a.m., he'd called 14 times. Left 3 voicemails, each one a little more frantic than the last. The first was confusion. "Bro, what's going on? Did you lock the door by accident?" The second was irritation. "This isn't funny. Seriously, open the door." The third was desperation. "Come on, man. Where am I supposed to go?" I laid in bed, phone on silent, eyes closed, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I woke up at 7:12 a.m. to a still, hushed quiet. No footsteps in the hallway. No blender roaring to life for Neil's morning protein. No Spotify blasting some overproduced motivational podcast about dominating your day. Just sunlight leaking through the blinds and the satisfying weight of stillness. I stretched, made coffee, and stood by the window watching the morning unfold. Down on the sidewalk, Neil was sitting next to his duffel bag, tapping furiously at his phone. His hair was messy, like he hadn't slept, and he had this wild look in his eyes, part embarrassment, part disbelief. He looked up once, right at my window. I didn't move. Just sipped my coffee. A few minutes later, I heard light footsteps outside my front door. Then a knock. Not loud. Hesitant. "Ryan," he called. "Can we talk?" His voice was smaller than usual. Less Neil, more human. But I'd had this conversation in my head 1,000 times. All the apologies that never came. All the jabs he passed off as just teasing. All the years I kept my mouth shut to keep the peace. This time, I didn't feel like keeping the peace. I didn't feel like talking. So I didn't say a word. He knocked again. Then tried the door handle. Then silence. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand. He started texting again. "This is ridiculous, man. Seriously. Can you at least let me in to get my laptop? Are you really doing this over a joke?" A joke. That's what he always called it when he put me down. A joke when he laughed at my car. A joke when he mocked my clothes. A joke when he told people I was the safe brother. Like I was a beige wall someone painted to avoid risk. But here we were. Him on the pavement. Me in my paid-off condo. My name on the deed. My name on the bills. My key in the lock. He had nowhere to go, and he was just starting to realize it. At 8:43 a.m., he tried one last time. "Look, I messed up. I was being a jerk. Can we just talk?" Still, I said nothing. Because here's the thing about Neil, he'd said sorry before. Every time he crossed a line, every time he went too far, he knew exactly what to say to get back in. And I'd always let him. But this time, he wasn't just out of luck. He was out of rope. And for the first time in our lives, I wasn't reaching down to pull him back up. I don't know why, but after he stopped knocking, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table staring at my phone, not to check his messages, but to scroll through old photos. The kind of ones you don't even remember taking until they show up like ghosts. There was one of us from a 4th of July party years ago. Neil had his arm around my shoulders, grinning wide, drink in hand. I looked tired. That was the thing about being around Neil, he drained you slowly. Like a leak in a pipe you don't notice until your ceiling caves in. Growing up, he was the guy everyone loved. Big personality. Big dreams. Big presence. When he got into finance and started pulling 6 figures before 30, my parents acted like he'd cracked the code to life. He bought them a trip to the Bahamas once, and I swear they talked about it for 3 years. Meanwhile, I was the one who fixed their leaky sink. The one who dropped off groceries when Dad got sick. The one who co-signed a car loan after Neil accidentally missed 3 payments on the one he promised to take care of. But none of that mattered. Neil was shiny. I was steady. And in this family, shiny always won. He once told me, during a family dinner no less, "I don't know how you live the way you do, man. You've got no drive. You're just existing." And Mom just laughed, like it was funny. Like I didn't already feel invisible enough. That night, I started a spreadsheet titled, Mortgage Snowball Plan. It took me 8 years. 8 years of living below my means. Of budgeting every cent. Of skipping nights out, skipping vacations, watching him mock me for not living a little. And now, here we were. I looked down at my phone again. Nothing new. No more calls. No more texts. Just quiet. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw that he was gone. His bags, too. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I just felt clean. Like a room that had finally been aired out after years of stale air. 3 days passed. No calls. No texts. No updates. The silence was eerie, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that hums in the background when you finally shut off a machine that's been rattling for years. A silence that feels earned. I went back to work on Monday like nothing had happened. Punched in, finished my reports, joked with Marcus from IT about the vending machine eating his dollar again. Normal stuff. But by Wednesday, I started hearing from the echo chamber. It started with a text from our cousin, Jamie. "Hey, I heard about what happened with Neil. Everything okay?" Then came Lisa, a mutual friend who hadn't messaged me in months. "Wow. So you really kicked him out? That's kind of harsh, isn't it?" And that's when I knew Neil was doing what Neil always did. Telling half a story. Painting himself as the tragic figure. The brother who was just joking around and got thrown to the curb. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. I already knew how this part of the cycle went. Neil wasn't used to consequences. He was used to the reset button, used to people patching things up, smoothing things over. If not family, then friends. If not friends, then sympathy. He collected it like coins. But this time, there was no reset button. That Friday, I got an email from my building's front office. "Hello Ryan. Just a heads up, your brother stopped by and asked if you could let him in. We explained we couldn't do that without your permission. Thought you should know." That was the moment it hit me. He still thought this was temporary. Still thought he could wear me down. Still didn't understand that this wasn't a timeout. It was an ending. The door wasn't closed for now. It was locked for good. Saturday morning came quiet and gray, one of those days where the sky forgets how to be anything but dull. I made pancakes. Real ones. Not the protein powder ones Neil used to stink up the kitchen with. Halfway through flipping the second batch, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another. Still, I let it ring. Then a third call, this time with a voicemail. I stared at it for a second before pressing play. "Hey, it's Neil. I guess you blocked my number. I get it. Look, man, I know I said some stuff, but I've had a rough couple weeks. I'm trying here. Could we just talk? Not even about me moving back in. Just talk." There it was again. That voice he used when he was cornered. Soft, measured. Like he was holding out an olive branch. But behind his back, I knew there was a rock. I didn't reply. Just set the phone down and poured syrup on the pancakes. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. Cleared my head. Took a longer route through the park, headphones in, playlist on shuffle. It wasn't until I got back to the building that I noticed the front desk girl looking flustered. "He's upstairs," she said before I even reached the counter. I tried to stop him. He followed someone through the side door. Said he was your brother, and just needed to grab something from inside. I stood there for a moment, heart calm. Not angry. Not even surprised. I walked up the stairs slowly. No need to rush. My door was closed. But the moment I turned the corner, I saw him, sitting on the floor outside my unit like a kid waiting outside the principal's office. Neil. No bags. Just him. He stood up fast when he saw me. Gave a sheepish smile, like this was just a misunderstanding between good friends. Hey, he said. Look, I know. I held up a hand. Don't. Okay, just hear me out. He was talking fast now, like he could outrun the point. I'm not asking to move back in. I've been staying on a friend's couch. It's not great. I haven't been sleeping. I messed up. I get that. But bro, come on. We're family. That word again. Family. It used to work like a spell. Not anymore. I didn't yell. Didn't posture. I just unlocked my door, stepped inside, and before closing it I said, "You're right. We were family. But family doesn't kick you while you're climbing. And they don't laugh when you're finally standing." He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. I didn't mean. But I was already closing the door. Click. I leaned against the wood for a second. I could hear him shuffling outside. Breathing heavily. Then silence. Then the sound of footsteps walking away. The thing about endings is, they rarely feel how you expect. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel like some mastermind who'd finally turned the tables. I just felt still. The kind of still that only comes when you've spent years living with tension wound around your chest, so tightly you forgot what a deep breath felt like. And now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I could exhale. The door clicked shut behind Neil, and I stood there in my entryway, staring at nothing in particular. The hallway was clean. Quiet. No scattered shoes, no gym bags dumped like I was running a locker room. No faint scent of his awful cologne lingering in the air. It was like my home had finally returned to me. That night he didn't call. The next day he did. Twice. I didn't answer. Then came the message that tried to sound like he hadn't just trespassed into my building like a desperate teenager. Hey. Just checking in. No hard feelings? I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to be cold. But because I was done pouring warmth into someone who used it to burn me later. I used to think holding your ground had to come with anger. With speeches and shouting and dramatic exits. But it doesn't. Sometimes it's just not answering the door. Sometimes it's silence that screams the loudest. The weekend passed. By Monday, I found myself rearranging furniture. I shifted the couch, boxed up some old books, even bought a new throw blanket. It wasn't about decor. It was about claiming space, physically, emotionally. The corner where Neil used to keep his massive gaming setup? Gone. Replaced with a plant I never knew I wanted. And on the fridge I taped a copy of my mortgage. Paid in full. Notice. Like a trophy. Not to gloat. Just to remind myself, this place wasn't just a home. It was proof that steady can win. That slow and quiet can build something that lasts. That you don't have to be flashy to be free. It came Wednesday evening. A letter. Not an email, not a text. An actual, physical envelope slid under my door like something from another era. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. No return address. Just my name, written in Neil's unmistakable handwriting. Too confident, too wide, like it needed to take up more space than it earned. I debated throwing it away. But something told me to read it. Not because I was hoping for redemption. But because I was curious what version of himself he was selling now. I opened it. No greeting. No. Hey bro. Just a stream of sentences, jagged and uneven, like he wrote it without pausing. You probably think I've never had to beg. And you'd be mostly right. I've always landed on my feet because someone was always there with a net. Usually you. And I told myself it was no big deal. You're the responsible one, you like that stuff. But I never once said thank you. Not really. I joked because it was easier than admitting you were doing better than me. Not flashier. Better. You didn't need an audience. I did. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I had to at least try to say this before we're just strangers with shared DNA. That was it. No grand apology. No promise to change. Just a few sentences that, for the first time, didn't sound like they were written by someone trying to win. And yet, it didn't change anything. Because recognition isn't repair. He still walked over years of jabs, mockery, and condescension like they were minor stumbles. Still didn't ask how I was doing. Still didn't ask if I needed anything. Still didn't ask why I finally closed the door. He wanted peace, but only after being forced to face consequences. I folded the letter and tucked it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. A keepsake from the day I finally stopped letting history rewrite itself. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The weeks that followed felt like someone turned down the volume on my entire life. No phone calls. No surprise visits. No sarcastic one-liners tossed across the kitchen like little grenades. Neil was finally gone, not just physically, but emotionally. No longer in my space. No longer in my mind. Just absent. It's strange, isn't it? How someone can take up so much space when they're around, and yet when they're gone, the absence feels like fresh air. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Cooking real meals, not just functional dinners to feed two. Reorganizing the closet without having to make space for someone else's scattered mess. Sitting on my own couch, my own coffee in hand, on my own timeline, and feeling no need to justify any of it. I even started playing guitar again, something I hadn't touched in ages. Neil used to mock it. Your little hobby. He'd call it, like anything that didn't feed into a resume was a waste of time. But that first night I picked it up again, I strummed until my fingers ached. Not because I sounded good, I didn't. But because it felt like taking something back. Some nights I'd sit on the balcony and just listen. To the city. To the wind in the trees. To the silence that used to be filled with someone else's noise. I didn't realize how much energy I'd spent bracing for Neil's next jab, next insult, next needy favor disguised as a joke. Living with him was like walking through a room full of glass with bare feet. Nothing happened yet, but you were always ready to bleed. I ran into Jamie, the cousin who'd messaged me a few weeks earlier, at a coffee shop. She asked if Neil and I had patched things up. I just smiled and said, "No need." She blinked, confused. "You're not going to talk again?" "I think we already did. We just didn't realize the last conversation was the last one." And that's the thing. Sometimes people don't leave. You just stop opening the door. Letting Neil go wasn't an act of anger. It was clarity. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping him close. But peace isn't proximity. Sometimes it's distance. A locked door. A voicemail unanswered. A note read once, then put away. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for that. I felt free.